Speak with two people on this issue in a moment. Jonathan Isaby, editor of Brexit Central. But first, Femi Oluwole, who is one of the co-founders of Our Future, Our Choice, a group that believes young people's voices must be heard on Brexit. Good morning to you, gents. Femi, hi.
Good morning.
So your group, Our Future, Our Choice, they say there's no good Brexit deal for young people. So what would happen then, or what do you think would happen if we had another referendum?
If we had another referendum, it would be a referendum on an actual concrete Brexit deal. So it would be Theresa May's deal, whatever deal we negotiated, which is the one that everyone seems to hate right now, versus remaining in the EU. Now, given that remaining in the EU achieved a 48% support in 2016, when the alternative was a potential good Brexit deal, and now we don't have a potential good Brexit deal, I think that people would vote heavily to stay in the EU.
In terms of Tony Blair's points yesterday, he alluded to this sort of polarity between the Rees-Mogg type leave and simple remain. Do you echo that scenario?
A Rees-Mogg type deal is a deal that basically takes us out of the EU without any protections for Northern Ireland, without any protections for EU citizens. It is completely irresponsible. If we leave the EU without a deal, that means that the 1.4 million British people who live in countries across Europe, whose right to live in their own homes is based on the fact that they are EU citizens, they lose the right to live in their own homes if we don't have a deal. Now, it is completely irresponsible to do that, and I don't think the 17 million people who voted for Brexit would actually have wanted to do that to people.
Jonathan Isaby, morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning, Ian.
And of course, you have argued and you document on a daily basis through Brexit Central your views on this. Just if you can articulate to our listeners, Jonathan, why you think what Blair is saying clearly can't work, and I suppose from your side of things shouldn't work.
Well, it gets pretty tiresome, these calls for another referendum, because we had a referendum in 2016 and it was the biggest democratic exercise in British electoral history, and 17.4 million people voted for us to leave the EU, more than have voted for anyone or anything in British electoral history, and people expect that result to be delivered. And frankly, the only people who are campaigning for another referendum are people who didn't like the result of the first referendum. And today we've got the government being accused of contempt of Parliament. Well, these people campaigning for another referendum are in contempt of the British people and in contempt of the democratic process.
Yeah, Femi, I mean, let's just put that straight back at you. I know you've responded to this many times, but what Jonathan says there is an irredeemable fact, isn't it? I mean, we voted. It was a huge turnout for that vote. It was a narrow percentage win for Leave, but nonetheless, that's how referenda work. And if you look back, I think it was Gisela Stewart, correct me if I'm wrong, yesterday that made us a speech on this point, saying, well, look, we didn't have these kind of post-mortem debates over the Scottish referendum, or when we were looking at AV voting, changing the system, but most people have forgotten that we did that. More autonomy for the Welsh Assembly. Nobody questioned the authenticity of those results.
Well, I mean, I'd be curious, but by way of answer, I'd be curious whether or not Mr. Isaby is in support of the position that Jacob Rees-Mogg is taking on this issue.
Jonathan, do you support the more Rees-Mogg position? Just get the heck out and sort out the detail later?
I think the British people think that we need to have a clean break from the European Union. That's what we voted for. And I think the one thing that Femi and I would agree on is that the deal which Theresa May is putting forward before the British people is not acceptable. It would create the UK as a vassal state still subject to EU laws, and with the potential backstop being indefinitely in a customs union, unable to do trade deals and all the rest of it. So there is clearly dissatisfaction with that deal that is on the table. But frankly, the way the European Union has behaved and the kind of deal that it effectively has foisted upon the UK, I think most British people are going to think, well, these people are basically bullying us. They're working out 39 billion quid, and we're not getting a great deal in return. And frankly, if they're going to treat us with such contempt, then actually we should just have a clean break and get out as soon as possible.
Femi, respond to that. Let's go for the clean break.
I was kind of looking for a yes or no. Do you support Jacob Rees-Mogg's position?
But how do you define Jacob Rees-Mogg's position?
We could talk all morning about the specifics of Jacob Rees-Mogg's position. What about just the overarching point of this usurping, as Jonathan would see it, of democracy? We had the vote. Cameron made it clear at the time. There is the quote from David Cameron. He says quite clearly what the British people will be voting for is to leave the European Union, to leave the single market. There will not be another referendum. If we vote leave, then we vote leave. Couldn't have been clearer.
The reason why I make reference to Jacob Rees-Mogg is because in 2011, when he was actually arguing that we should have the first referendum in the first place, what he said was you could have two referendums. This is a direct quote. You could have two referendums. One referendum is the one we had in 2016, and then another referendum after the renegotiation is completed. Even Jacob Rees-Mogg was fully aware of the fact that you cannot simply have a referendum with so many options as the notion of Brexit, because Brexit literally means Brexit, leaving the EU. That's what it said on the ballot paper.
Jonathan Isaby, is there
you leave the European Union.
Is there something in that, Jonathan, that given the seismic nature, the unprecedented nature of what we were asked to do in 2016, is it now worth going back to the table for another vote?
No, I think what Jacob Rees-Mogg may not have said 7 years ago is completely irrelevant here. The government made clear in 2016 Hold on, let me answer the question. The government made clear on the literature they sent at considerable expense to the taxpayer that this result would be final, the government would deliver it, and people expect the government to get on and do just that.
Well, if what Jacob Rees-Mogg said 6 years ago isn't relevant, what about what you said 3 weeks ago when you said that Parliament and people will have to decide on the deal as to whether or not it matches up with Theresa May's red lines? You said that personally 3 weeks ago. That's because you recognise that this deal does not match up with the will of the people. Now, as I was explaining before, if Brexit literally means leaving the EU, which is what people voted for, then this deal conforms with that.
So you both agree that this deal is not a good deal. It's where we go forward on this. And Femi, you would favour another referendum, but can you see the problems with that? That even if it was won by Remain by a similar 3% margin, then Brexiteers could, of course, come back and make the same arguments that you're making now about the lack of democratic clarity in that result.
But that's the point. In this whole argument that it would be best of three, best of whatever, or that if Remain wins and it goes the other way, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point. We voted to leave the EU, and leaving the EU had so many different options that when it finally gets narrowed down to a single option, that is the only option that we have, that option should be put to the people. Now, any future referendum must be on a specific plan, because clearly leaving the European Union as a concept is so broad that there isn't possible to have a valid opinion on that.
Jonathan Isaby, it's an alliance of issues. One single polarising question was never going to cut it. What's wrong with another referendum? What's wrong with going the Blair way to settle this once and for all?
Well, I think it would show contempt for the British people, who made a very clear decision in 2016 that they wanted to see us out of the European Union. And frankly, that these campaigners for another referendum are simply moving the goalposts, because it was quite clear that the referendum we had in 2016 was final, and the government had a duty to carry out the wishes of the people. And Femi says, we still have a chance to remain in the European Union. Well, frankly, remain is a leap into the unknown, because we're leaving the European Union on March the 29th next year. Another referendum would not be able to take place even if there were to be one for about a year, because the process involved in setting up a referendum, and by which stage remaining in the European Union would mean adopting the euro, adopting Schengen, and losing our rebate in all likelihood. So Remain would be a complete leap in the dark.
Gents, I know we will. I know we will speak again on this, and I'm sure Femi could have come back, and Jonathan could have countered that, and then Femi could have come back, and then Jonathan could have come back, and we could have carried on forever and a day. But we will speak again. Thank you. That's Femi Oluwole, who's one of the co-founders of Our Future, Our Choice. He believes particularly young people's voices must be heard and would support a second referendum. Jonathan Isaby clearly doesn't. He's from an editor of Brexit Central.